Happy Monday, and welcome back to the Lorden Arts channel. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery, and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery? Today's episode is called Hidden Away. Joanne Miller's time growing up on her family's farm in Blanchard, Louisiana was charmed, yet simple. Her family owned several acres of land known as Sunny Slope, which was covered in pear orchards, peach trees, and blackberry bushes that the family harvested and sold. At the center of it all was a white house with a wraparound porch. Joanne thrived in this picturesque environment. As a young woman, her religion would provide a framework that would help her succeed in several ways, including receiving her master's degree in education. Joanne loved children and wanted to spend her life teaching. While teaching in a Mississippi town known as Rolling Fork, she met and married a man named James Nichols and would go on to have a son named James III. Soon, the family moved to Missouri, where Joanne continued to teach, and James sold insurance before being hired by IBM. In 1963, IBM moved them to Poughkeepsie, New York. Of course, teachers are needed everywhere, and Joanne soon began working at a school in town, teaching the first grade. Her students loved her. She made them feel special and was always quick to celebrate milestones like their first day at school, as well as birthdays and holidays. She even founded a small Baptist church near town. In 1985, she and James were still living in Poughkeepsie with their 2 golden retrievers. Just before Christmas, on December 21st, Joanne was scheduled for a hair appointment, but the salon called their home that afternoon asking why Joanne had never shown up. James called the police to report her missing. When investigators questioned James about the disappearance, they were told that the night before, he and Joanne had dinner with another couple at a nearby restaurant. After a brief argument, they decided to come home for the night. The next morning, he left Joanne at home while he went out to buy dog food, but when he returned, she was gone. On one of the several computers he owned, he said a note had been found, left by Joanne. In it, she talked of being depressed over the death of their son, James III. In May of 1982, 25-year-old James, or Ticker as he was known to others, was killed at Sardis Lake in Mississippi. While riding on the hood of his amphicar, a car that travels on land and water, he fell off and drowned. His death was a crushing blow to Joanne. A neighbor would tell investigators that she had spoken to Joanne about how the issue was exacerbated when James brought the car to New York, parking the amphicar in their driveway. The constant reminder of her son's death was wearing her down. Investigators felt that the note did show she was depressed, but didn't express much beyond that. James, however, stated that he believed that she had either run away to join a religious cult or had ended her own life. Some neighbors seemed to support one of those conclusions, with a few agreeing that they thought she might have run away to become a nun. When James was asked by neighbors what had happened, he simply told them that she had left him. The following day, when investigators returned to the Nichols home, they found Joanne's car sitting in the driveway, a car that was reportedly missing with Joanne. James stated that he had found the car at a nearby shopping mall and had brought it home. When it was examined, the interior had been freshly cleaned and the floors vacuumed. On Christmas Eve, James told neighbors that Joanne had called him to tell him she was doing fine, but hung up when he asked where she was. Waterways and woods were searched on foot and by helicopter. Investigators also walked through the Nichols household, which they found to be very untidy and hard to move around in. At one point, they were shown to the basement where James had a gun safe. When the investigation widened and more people were interviewed, the marriage that James had portrayed as fine began to take on a more sinister tone. Coworkers and neighbors told of a woman unhappy in her marriage, but Joanne never complained to her family. She was described as being of the old school. When you're married for good. James, it seems, was prone to disturbing behaviors. A teacher's aide that Joanne worked with stated that she hated the way her husband hoarded items in their house and on the property. She also didn't like the fact that her paychecks had to be turned over to James immediately. She also lamented the fact that after her cat's death, James placed its remains in the freezer. Every time she cooked, she saw her lost, loved pet. James was known to be a loner and very antisocial. Neighbors frequently saw him sitting in his car, reading the newspaper. One person, who was a new addition to the neighborhood, said James welcomed them by coming in their front door without knocking. Another reported seeing him drive around town with a mannequin sitting in the passenger seat. Another neighbor, named Denise Dara, had some disturbing things to add. She claimed that one afternoon, she and her children found an injured squirrel. She asked James if he could help her with it. He took a hatchet and killed it in front of everyone. On another afternoon, while painting her house in cut-off blue jean shorts, she found James standing at the foot of the ladder, taking pictures of her. As time went by and leads failed to help the investigation, James was put under surveillance. They found him being visited by another woman. When he was questioned about her, he said, "If you don't have a warrant for my arrest, you can talk to my lawyer." Frustrated with the lack of movement on the case, Joanne's brother, John Miller, hired a private investigator. He would spend $150,000 for an investigation that ultimately went nowhere. Through the years, investigators found 3 men who claimed that James had asked them to kill Joanne in a staged home invasion. Those confessions also didn't help move the case forward. Investigators were convinced James was responsible for Joanne's disappearance, but they had no proof that any crime had been committed. As decades passed, no reports of any contact with Joanne were reported. James continued to live on the same property, in the same house, adding to his hoarding collection. 7 sheds would eventually sit at the back of the property, packed floor to ceiling, surrounded by a high privacy fence. James's odd behavior continued, with reports of him driving around town on one of his lawnmowers, or just standing in his backyard, staring at nothing. On December 27, 2012, 27 years almost to the day Joanne disappeared, a welfare check was requested. James hadn't been seen in some time. He was found in his home, surrounded by debris and garbage that filled the house. He died of natural causes at the age of 82. No one from his family would claim his body or the estate. The house was eventually sold, and a contractor was hired to clean out all of the debris and make repairs. In the basement, behind a false wall, contractors found a large plastic bin. When it was opened, they found an object wrapped in a sheet inside a plastic bag. That object was a human skeleton. Its hands were tied with rope, and a portion of the right side of the skull was missing. Dental records would confirm that they had found the body of Joanne Nichols. The coroner ruled that her death was caused by blunt force trauma to the head. Investigators theorized that Joanne and James fought the day she disappeared, possibly over his hoarding. Rather than lose any of his treasures, he killed Joanne and hid her in the wall. At no time during the investigation into her disappearance was the house thoroughly searched, as investigators couldn't prove a crime had been committed there. Joanne's nephew, Randy Miller, and his father never gave up on the investigation and called police regularly for updates. They, along with the rest of her family, have the closure of putting Joanne to rest, but still harbor a strong resentment towards James. Quote, "Maybe this isn't a Christian thing to say," Randy said, "but I do get satisfaction out of the fact that he died alone and surrounded by nothing but junk. It sounds like he was right where he should have been, miserable and living in filth. There was no reason for him to die alone. He did it all to himself." Case cracked. I would like to thank NBCNewYork.com, CNN.com, USAToday.com, The New York Times, and FindAGrave.com. Of course, the biggest thank you goes to Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's case. And here she is now to discuss it with us. Christy, this case is like a perfect example of one of the most troubling aspects of missing persons investigations. Some of them, and I think unfortunately maybe more than we're aware of, are actually unconfirmed murders. And that can really tie law enforcement's hands in terms of what they can do.
It definitely can. And something that I see all the time from commenters is that every missing persons case should be treated as a crime. That way you get essential evidence that would be lost if they're just considered missing.
Yeah.
It's so tiring to hear, well, they're an adult, they can disappear if they want to. I'm like, yeah, but how many of these people need our help or have been murdered? I mean,
it is weird that we hear that so often for how little we actually hear that outcome. Like, we have heard that outcome, but it's super, super rare. As opposed to the other outcome of it actually being a homicide. I kind of understand, because the number of missing persons cases is a bizarre funnel. It just starts with so many, and so many of those naturally fall out, and it kind of gets narrower and narrower as time passes to where you get to the ones that are like, oh, something is seriously wrong here. But you're identifying them as time is passing. So I mean, if most people show back up within 72 hours or within a first week or the first 2 weeks, it's going to be hard to process everything as a full-on crime scene. But I do think there needs to be some processes specific for missing persons cases that are doing their best to just be a snapshot, to just kind of capture what's going on at that time. I mean, maybe you're not going to run all the DNA tests, but maybe you are going to do the swabs and collect the information, but then just not send them off to the lab. Something like that, like an in-between kind of, we think something weird is going on. I mean, this is one of those cases where investigators seem to know what was happening. The story wasn't quite adding up. They did get into the house a little bit, but obviously not a full search. It's it just does seem like something was kind of missed in this. We know that they saw his computer, and apparently he had multiple computers. We know that he showed them his gun safe, even taking them down to the basement, which is actually where she's located, right?
Yeah.
It was a basement wall.
It is.
How did they not detect that there was a body in there?
Well, I think between her being wrapped in a plastic bin liner, inside a plastic bin, and a sheet closed up in the wall, just effectively masked the smell.
Yeah. Wow. And there were some other things on top of the computers that were found in there that might be concerning.
Yes, there were. I mean, not the amount of computers he had. I mean, back then you have one, that's something, but he had several computers.
Yeah.
He had fire and police scanners that ran day and night as well. And that's unusual.
It is. I do have to say it was a little more usual back then. Like, I mean, maybe you wouldn't be surprised to know this about me, but when I was a kid, I had a police scanner and I would run it all the time. I mean, essentially before cops, it was cops. Like, you would listen to the police scanner. Oh, something's going on. It would also kind of tell you what was going on in your immediate vicinity. Like, occasionally I'd hear like, oh, well, there's a shooting over on the next street or something like that. But yeah, so back then I think it was a little more common. Probably,
that's true.
Yeah, probably not as common now as a form of, it was really a form of entertainment. It's not like I was protecting myself or something like that, but it was kind of a between spot of being interested in justice and crime, and like having a next door app. It was just like right in the middle there. It was fulfilling that need, back in the 80s and 90s.
Well, and now that you say that, I remember we had a police scanner that picked up the fire department too.
Yeah.
We always just kept it turned down unless we heard sirens, and we turned it up. But I think you're right there.
You wonder what it could have taken for some probable cause in this case. What would have like moved that needle? I mean, we know they have him under surveillance. They're obviously looking in the right direction. Like, I can't believe they couldn't quite move it, like get that needle to the other side where they're like, okay, we've got probable cause, we can go in.
Well, and something I wondered about that too. Could they not have went in because of the hoarding? Isn't that illegal in some states?
I did look into that, and basically, from what I can see, in some states it falls under public nuisance laws. There's kind of two components to this. If the hoarding is endangering an animal, then there are certain laws and prevention that happens around that. We do know they had 2 golden retrievers, but I don't know if they still had the golden retrievers at the time.
It never said anything else about them.
Okay. And then the general one is just general public nuisance. Like, it's unattractive to your neighbors. It's dangerous in some way. Could be, creating smells that are emanating. There's another stat that I saw about fires, and it's a ridiculously high number of like people that die in a fire. I want to say, and this is off the top of my head, I'm not quoting the stat here, but it's something like 1 in 6 of those victims are related to a hoarding situation where the hoarding situation actually either started the fire or was responsible for accelerating the fire. Because, yeah, I mean, I've been in a house of a hoarder, and it is literally, it's trash, it's newspaper, it's old, like cartons from their takeout food. Like, it's just all this combustible material that's sitting around and stacked to the point. The house that I was in, which sounds like this one because they're kind of describing it the same way, there was these narrow channels through the house, and the stuff was stacked about 6 or 7 feet tall, and you could only use those narrow channels. And I remember it was a crazy thing because I was helping someone move a refrigerator in there. And it
That
was
must have
like,
been hard.
yeah, well, we couldn't even, like, you couldn't get it in the house because of all that. So instead they wanted it in their garage. Well, guess what? When we pulled up to the garage, you could see that the garage was so full, the door wasn't even closing anymore. It was partway open, and there was stuff just kind of starting to fall out from under around the garage. We wound up moving the fridge. They have all their trails to get around. Down in the garage, there was kind of a rear entrance, and there was literally just enough of a square space for you to like go there and do laundry. Like, because they need their little trail to do the laundry. Well, guess where the fridge went? Just right. Right into that space. I mean, basically at that point, it's like, okay, we're not going to do laundry anymore. I've got this fridge I need to keep for no reason, and we're going to put it right here. It's a really, it's a terrible thing. It's apparently a terrible disorder to deal with. There's multiple TV shows about it, and I was kind of surprised.
Oh, yes.
I went looking for resources on it, and I can see a lot of commercial resources. I can see a lot of people that are, hey, we'll come out and help you. We'll organize, we'll go through your stuff. I really wasn't finding too many like charities that were addressing it. Yeah, I know. It was kind of a little heartbreaking because honestly, I was looking for something where I was like, oh, I should support this. And I want to do a donation. I mean, even though it's kind of the wrong side of the donation, but it's a serious problem that's affecting all kinds of people. It's not just, James, but so just to be clear, we did discuss that he had some strange traits, driving around with a mannequin, staring off in his backyard and stuff like that. You might attribute that stuff to his personality or something that's going on with him. But hoarding is a disorder. It's known to affect between 2 to 6% of our population. It can be treated with therapy and medication. You can find groups online, and you can definitely find services in your area. It was a very easy search. So if you need help with that or just a jump start, just do a Google search on Mayo Clinic hoarding. And then from there, that'll spin you into all kinds of local resources. And another big component of that is if you're trying to help someone that's in a hoarding situation, the approach on that is, if you've ever watched those shows, it's a very unique approach that you need to take with those situations. And there's a ton of research online that you could do to learn about that as well. So
nice.
Christy, thank you so much for all your hard work on today's episode. We really appreciate you. And I've got some other people to thank right now. Thank you, PayPal supporters Amanda Beard and Melissa Heinbach. For over 6 years, we've always run limited commercial ads here on YouTube, and we can't do that without support. If you'd like to help the channel keep going and keep growing, please visit lordandarts.com. There, you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee, like Ms. Cat recently did. We know that learning about the mechanisms that help support and find justice in these cases is important to understand the many unsolved cases we also cover, and we really appreciate your support in allowing us to continue doing that. Remember, you can get another Lord and Art story every week on the Seriously Mysterious podcast. A new episode is coming tomorrow and every Tuesday after that. Visit seriouslymysterious.com and remember to subscribe on your favorite podcatchers. While you're here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon below if you want to catch one of our weekly Secret Studio live shows. And of course, I'll be back with a new Unsolved Mystery for you on Friday, right here on the Lord and Arts channel.